We are now in a situation where a major American city is burning to the ground. We are now in a situation where the governor has called in the National Guard. We are now in a situation where the President of the United States is talking about directing the National Guard. All of this in response to the video that went viral of the police killing of an unarmed black man in Minnesota, which has sparked outrage and protests around the country. I have a hot take. I have a blazing hot take on the situation that we're seeing unfolding right now in Minneapolis and beginning to pop up in other places. Here's my blazing hot take. Burning American cities to the ground is bad. That's it. And you would think that would not be a controversial opinion. I tweeted this out. I also tweeted out, I had another blazing hot take. That was, looting is bad. I tweeted that. I figured nobody could disagree with that, right? Oh boy, was I wrong. We are now seeing people in our public discourse defending looting, defending burning a city to the ground. Why? Well, here's the response I've seen from blue check marks, from media commentators, from people around the country. The response is, sure, looting is bad and burning a city to the ground is bad, but so is police brutality. Yes, of course that's true. Right. What do those two things have to do with one another? They'll say, yes, looting and burning a city to the ground is bad, but so is murder. It may very well have been murder what happened in that interaction between the police and the unarmed man. Yeah, right. What on earth do those two things have to do with one another? Nothing. And yet you've got a lot of condescending white liberals who are pretending that these have something to do with one another, particularly in the mainstream media. And there's a real irony here because the movement that is coming up behind these protests and more than protests is Black Lives Matter. And yet the people who are more likely to be affected by the looting and the burning and all of these things are the very black lives that they pretend to protect. Not only is this not helpful, it is actively harmful, it is actively undermining whatever point the protesters are trying to make. And the condescension is what drives me, I think, the craziest about it, because there are people in the mainstream media just making excuses for all of this. Excuses that they would never make, excuses that I think portray some deep racial condescension. There's a clip going around of an MSNBC journalist speaking to the camera and saying, actually, things are basically fine here. As you can see and even hear in the background, a massive fire blazing, engulfing the whole screen.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started.
This is mostly a protest. It's not unruly. Yes. Oh, that behind me? Oh, yes. They're torching down the police station. But look, it's mostly very peaceful. Nothing to see here, folks. Please move along. I want to be careful how I characterize this. New York Times did the same thing. New York Times is running headlines. Minnesota, flames rage in Minnesota. Some wording to the effect of that. Flames rage. Minnesota burning. No, it's not. It didn't just catch on fire like a forest can accidentally. People set the place on fire. I think Van Jones is a left-wing commentator. He's black himself. He went on CNN. And look, obviously, Van Jones and I do not agree politically on most things. You know, he's on the left, I'm on the right. But I think he made a great point here about white liberals, about where the real race problem relies in America. Obviously, I think there's quite a lot of evidence that there is a race problem. There are flames of racial division being stoked right now pretty actively. But Van Jones doesn't lay the feet at right-wingers or conservatives. He doesn't even lay the blame at the feet of actual, honest, true racists in the Ku Klux Klan. He lays it at white liberals, people who more or less are on his own side of the political aisle.
It's not the racist white person who's in the Ku Klux Klan that we have to worry about. It's the white liberal Hillary Clinton supporter walking her dog in Central Park who would tell you right now, people like that, oh, I don't see race. Race is no big deal to me. I see us all as the same. I give to charities. But the minute she sees a black man who she does not respect or who she has a slight thought against, she weaponized race like she had been trained by the Aryan Nation. A Klans member could not have been better trained to pick up the police and pick up her phone and tell the police it's a black man, African-American man, come get him. So even the most liberal, well-intentioned white person has a virus in his or her brain that can be activated at an instant. And so what you're seeing now is a curtain falling away.
You're seeing a curtain falling away from these liberal whites. And he makes a very good point here. You know, he's referring to this situation that took place in Central Park that also went viral. Obviously, in many ways more farcical than the situation that led to all these protests. The situation in Central Park was basically some creepy guy goes up to a woman and has dog treats to lure her dog away. And then this woman becomes absolutely hysterical. And she says, she's hysterical from the beginning. She becomes even more hysterical when she calls the cops. And she keeps bringing up the guy's race. She says, you know, I'm going to call the cops and say that there's an African-American man in a bicycle helmet trying to attack me. And I spoke a little bit on my own show a few days ago about this kind of ridiculous interaction and how absurd it is that the country is now being gripped by something so silly as this. But the point that Van Jones is making here is that white liberals talk a good game about racial equality, but they don't really play a good game. And I think there's a point about the Minnesota protests that people are missing as they try to lay the blame at the feet of Donald Trump. I mean, because everything is Donald Trump's fault, of course. Minneapolis is a blue city. It's a very liberal city. It's got a very liberal mayor, rather. Liberal politicians all over the place, governor, senators. Minnesota is so liberal that it is the only state that did not vote for Ronald Reagan in 1984. 1984, Ronald Reagan won 49 states. The one that they didn't win was Minnesota. And yet, somehow, this is the fault of Donald Trump. This is the fault of conservatives. This is the fault of Republicans. I think white liberals need to take a look at themselves, because I think what you're seeing here and why these riots have been allowed to spread so much is because of a sort of soft racism on the left that ends up being not so soft after all. I'll play you a clip from CNN's Brooke Baldwin. Brooke Baldwin went on TV. She was interviewing a Minneapolis city councilwoman, and she nearly started to cry. This is something that I think this is a job requirement now at CNN. If you want to be on air at CNN, you have to cry often on television. So she's joined her other friends at CNN and began almost to cry on air because of her white privilege.
I do not condone the looting and the violence. I do fully understand the outrage that people are expressing.
How would you? There are so many emotions as I'm sitting here listening to you. I'm having my own. I'm surprised at my own emotions on TV with you. But I've just as a white woman, aware of my own privilege in this country, I am so angry, and I can't even begin. Forgive me.
No, it's a human emotion, Brooke, and I think what sparks so much outrage is that there seems to be no regard for human.
So she starts crying on air. Is she really crying, or is it a performance? I don't know. I'll give Brooke Baldwin the benefit of the doubt, say she really was crying. If she really was, maybe CNN should start hiring some professionals who can keep it together while they present news and conduct interviews. Just a thought. But if it was performed, I see a lot of performative guilt and grief around here. My big question on it is, who does that help? What does that do? What's the point of that? There was a piece in the New York Times that came out yesterday which was talking about the Central Park incident, right? This incident where essentially nothing happened. And this, I called it Karen meets Karen. You know, there's this meme going around of typically middle-aged white women who get in everybody's business and ask to talk to the manager and police everybody's activity. And so this is a meme. Now it seems to have transcended racial and sexual boundaries. And then there was this man who was kind of behaving in the same way. And they had this ridiculous altercation, and that was it. The New York Times writes that this woman knew that one distressed cry would call down the weight of white supremacy on this man's black body. And the phrase black body is a strange phrase. It's from the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates. And leftists are using this phrase because I think because they view the world just about material things, just as bodies. You know, I don't want to be called a body. I want to be called a person. Nevertheless, I digress. The problem with the New York Times' analysis is that didn't happen. That didn't actually happen. The woman made the phone call, the distressed cry, but the weight of white supremacy didn't fall down on anybody. It's a good thing, right? We should all be happy about that. Actually, what happened is the woman lost her job, the woman lost her dog even, and the man is totally fine. And not only doesn't face any consequences, but actually is kind of heralded as a hero. So there's this big gap between what the left is saying is true and the reality of the situation itself. Nevertheless, we hear these protestations of white privilege and white guilt. What's interesting about that New York Times article is it was written by a woman who wrote a book about white tears. It was called The Weaponization of White Tears. And I'm starting to come around to her point of view, because when I watch Brooke Baldwin or I watch all this performative grief on air, I notice that the people who are performing this grief aren't doing anything to help the situation. None of that is helping. What they're actually doing through what Michael Gerson would have called the soft bigotry of low expectations is they're saying, okay, you've got protesters overwhelmingly who are black, looting, burning down this city. Let them do it. Let them do it. We would never do those things, we sophisticated white liberals, but we'll let other people do it because we view them as less than we view ourselves. That is a racist attitude. That is a condescending attitude. It is patronizing. These sort of performative, selective griefs are self-obsessive. It's an ugly thing. And I think we're at a very delicate moment right now. We're at a very tense moment in the country. You've got an unprecedented lockdown because of a global pandemic. You've got the media sensationalizing certain stories to pretend that events that are rare, thankfully, are actually political trends and epidemics, stoking racial resentment, very likely with partisan political campaign objectives at it. It's hopelessly irresponsible. It is indefensibly irresponsible. It's being led by the media, and they got to cut it out.